Poster Society. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the episode 9 of the TRPS MysteryTube. Welcome to TRPS, the Rock Poster Society. TRPS is an all-volunteer, nonprofit artist relief, and generally we're a group of poster-loving freaks. We have members joining from around the country and around the globe. If you're not a member already, you can go and join at the website at www.trips.org, TRPS. Remember to participate in the fan chat and question and answer for the MysteryTube giveaways. You have to be pre-registered at the trips.org website. So go to the website, it takes like 30 seconds. Click on the link at the bottom of the page and you are in. Happy to have you joining us from Facebook and other places, but if you're registered at TRPS, then you are ready to get in the game and participate in the poster giveaways, and you do not want to miss that today. My name is Corey Hartman. I'm from Furthur Frames, and I'm hosting today for TRPS. Today, I am joined by my friends Arik Roper and David DeAndrea and Richey Beckett, all the way from UK. We are here to talk about posters and what we do. Guys, glad to have you here. Glad you can join us, Richey, all the way from over the pond.
Thanks for having me.
Guys, I have questions and we can just let this kind of spiral wherever it goes. My first question generally is, how'd you get into this stuff? And really, I think my big question is how Arik and David kind of cross paths, because that's how I became aware of both of you was at the same time. It wasn't individually, it was through the Sleep series. So I'm curious about that. But in my research of learning about you guys and doing a little backstory of what I've been finding, you both, or rather you all three, have crisscrossing connections with various festivals and different events that you do. So that's kind of where I'd like to start. I was curious if anyone had any thoughts they'd like to throw out there.
Yeah. Well, I'll go first since, let's see. Yeah, I met you, Corey, through David, actually.
And David and I met at TRPS
Okay.
in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first time I met you guys was, I talked to David for a while, and then it happened that Sleep came through town, and I think I was already talking to David about something, and he said, well, maybe we could get together. And it turned out you guys had never been in the same place at the same time, apparently, to sign posters. And that became a really nice center point. We had a hell of a time. Yeah. What was the first piece that you guys did together, and were you working independently for Sleep first, or did you did you know each other first and then start doing work for them?
No, we knew, let's see, let me remember this correctly. David and I knew Sleep independently of each other first, right, David? I think we were both friends with them on our own terms before we met each other. And so I was doing, before I met David, I had done something. Oh, I'd done like a couple album covers for Sleep.
Way back.
Yeah, way back.
This is, there was like a decade or more in between.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to go way back, it's like David and I both knew Sleep in the 90s,
The beginning.
Yeah, way back then. And I didn't meet David until like, I don't know, mid 2000s or late 2000s or something like that. So I think David had been working with High on Fire and then I was friends with Matt as well separately. And eventually it just came to be that David and I were at the time the only ones doing any art for Sleep, as far as I know. And eventually Al suggested that we do a poster together, but we'd both been aware of each other before that, but not actually met.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this goes back to this essentially unofficial. I don't remember the details, but there was the Dope Smoker original CD, and I remember being a huge fan, seeing it at the record store, and it's Arik's art. It's the original version with the crucified pot leaf, and I think we were like kind of parallel in our early work. He was in New York and I was in Oakland, and I remember like the cover of Bad Acid Zines is always like, I think the first sticks in my head about the first thing I saw of Arik's, and then it just was kind of parallel, and then it kind of crossed like much later though, like 2010 is when Sleep got back together, and that was that poster you had showed first, Corey.
Mm-hmm.
And then so we ended up not long after that, maybe 2012, just doing a series of like maybe 3 collabs.
Yeah, and you were kind of doing stuff for Al and Ohm, while I was doing stuff for Matt and High on Fire. You know,
exactly.
we kind of had our different avenues with them, and then we came together with the Sleep stuff.
Exactly.
So there was a lot of parallels and convergences with us and that band in particular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let's Sleep. See if I can get some more stuff here for you.
And I mean, like that zine cover goes back to like the late, I don't even know.
That's what, Bad Acid?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Richie, did you ever see that magazine Bad Acid? It was from the UK.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see that.
Oh man.
I think the guy was from I want to say Warwickshire in England. Does that?
Oh, no way.
Do you know that? Is that a place, or did I just put 2 words together to make it a town?
Yeah, that works.
That's a place. Okay. Yeah. He was. This was in like '95 or something, and the guy got in touch with me. I forget how he knew me, and he was covering doom metal stuff at that time, so which was very limited. And I think he was like mostly Electric Wizard stuff because that was the UK doom band, and Cathedral, and a bunch of crust punk stuff as well. So he asked me to do the cover of that, and I did 1 or 2. I think only 1 got published, and then I never heard any more from him or the magazine or anything. But
well, Arik, he did time. He went to prison, I think.
Oh, well,
yeah.
I guess that put an end to the magazine.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it was. I remember passing it around between my whole scene, just 1 issue of it. It was, it's like such a different time. But
yeah, that was the last days of the zine. Almost.
Yeah.
Well, that guy went to jail, really? I didn't know that.
I mean, yeah, I'm pretty sure. I think it was something POW related.
Was it was it like a super lo-fi classic zine, just like a, kind of got that homemade vibe to it, DIY, or was it like a proper magazine?
It's hard to remember.
It was pretty DIY. It wasn't Xerox level DIY. It was printed, but it was single. It was black and white interior, and then the cover was very limited, almost like a risograph print of, just a few colors, like 3 colors max. It wasn't screen printed though. But so it was pretty DIY, but it wasn't like a, Xerox super underground looking thing, but it was pretty low budget looking.
I'm gonna have to track one down now. So.
Yeah,
Sure.
I'll show it to you, Richie. I mean, at least the cover, but I don't think I even have the magazine anywhere.
Wow. And at that point, you had maybe done, I don't know, like a Buzz Oven cover and maybe Nebula or something. It was just, I started noticing, immediately, and
yeah, that must have been how this guy found me, because it was from Buzz Oven, because that was like the kind of stuff that they were covering, like the kind of sludgy crust and doom stuff. And I don't remember what else he would have seen at that point. I don't think I had done anything for I Hate God, but yeah, that must have been where that came from. And then yeah, the Sleep stuff happened after that because of TP Records. The bootleg was was released by a couple people who I'm probably not supposed to mention still, but
Right.
I don't know if it's known or not. But anyway, that got a cease and desist,
Yep.
and then it was officially released by the Music Cartel, and then who else? Somebody else? No, I guess they were the only ones to officially release it.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was the TP Dope Smoker in 2003, and then.
Hey, did you guys come up with the Weedians, or was that
That's all Eric.
all right on?
Well, it's me based on the lyrics from the band written by Al Cisneros. He talks about them as a character in Dope Smoker, but I did the visual interpretation and turned them into these, you know.
I mean, that's one of the fascinating things about the vein of sleep posters. They're way outside my demographic, admittedly, you know, and that's the thing that I find interesting about posters is that I could be drawn in to another band really through your artwork. And it was one of the amazing things for me was how seamlessly you two collaborated together, that as different as your styles are, where the lines meet, it's amazing unison of two artists working together. And it was really what drew me into looking at your work. And when you guys came to the shop, it also, you know, again, it's the amazing thing about posters for me. And it kind of goes back to, I think the original intent was to draw people into different veins of music that they wouldn't normally be drawn into based on, well, you like the art, you're probably going to like the band, you know, and that's clearly what happened here, you know, and that's what led me down the rabbit hole that got me to know you guys. The Weedians, did it become more of a discussion as you went along that we're going to put a storyline here together? Or did you just, you know, each one is, you got the Harvester, you've got all these different actual characters. I know your posters by the names of the Weedians in them rather than by the events that took place. And I find that, you know, very counter to what I normally do. It's usually about the band and where it took place and when. And no, yours tell a story. And that's one of the interesting things I've always found about that stuff. Did you develop the story, or did you just, you know, is this a discussed thing, or you just kept coming up with images and said this one worked?
Well, I would say we approached it with, I mean, everything that David and I did with Sleep was in cooperation with the band themselves, primarily Al, who's, I would say, is the visionary of the band and was, you know, wrote the lyrics. And so they're a very specific band about what they want to include as their imagery. So we kind of approached it as installments in a story and kind of, you know, building this, this universe, this world. It was intentional. Yeah. It wasn't random that we were just kind of come up with something. I mean, it's not that there's a linear progression to these images necessarily, but they're all existing in the same world. And they all refer to things that more or less refer to things that are in the songs. And
I mean, it's an amazing series. No doubt about it. But across both of your individual collections and the collaborative stuff, it's a really insanely cool collection.
Cool. I mean, what do you think, David? I mean, with me and Al, when it was just he and I talking, he would say, how about this idea? How about that idea? And then I would sort of, you know, refine that into something workable.
Yeah.
That was with you.
Yeah, it was a really good flow for a while there. It was like a really good combination of everything. And us also, I think one factor is that we were both fans and we knew pretty intimately like the, you know, the lyrics and yeah, I feel like that there was some years there where it just worked. And like in that one, for example, on the screen, I'm kind of riffing off of what you had already established as a character and trying to do my version of it. And you know, of course they all had these like sort of, I don't really know, like a lot of the names, like the Aquarian, for example, that kind of just comes straight from the lyrics. And there's
Yeah.
my version, but you had already done an Aquarian, I think. And so it's just, I felt like it was just these established characters that could be like interpreted. And then, you know, they seemed to be, the band seemed to be into that idea for, and it seems like they still are. But they, it's sort of this cast of characters that's already been kind of established as far as it.
Yeah,
seems
it's
to me.
taken on a life of its own now. I mean, it's, you know,
Yeah.
other people are,
Tons of fan art, and that's really interesting to me.
yeah, the fan art aspect of this stuff is interesting. It's, I mean, I get sent images all the time of, you know, everything from bootleg toys to shirts to this and that, and, you know, beer cans and
I know.
you name it. And I mean, there's no point in trying to, you know, shut it down or control it, because I'd rather it actually just have a life of its own and see where it goes. That's how it becomes truly classic and part of the world. You know, there's no reason to keep a tight hold on it. I don't think anybody's profiting seriously off of, you know, selling this stuff.
Yeah.
But it's nice to see it to take its own course and have its own life, and, you know, become like a real.
Richie, what were you watching during all this? Were you watching these sleep posters? It looks like you started in a little after these guys were established. I was seeing posters out of them in mid 2000, and yours start right about 2000, a little after 2010. I start seeing your catalog start up. Is that correct?
I was kind of off in the wilderness for a good decade, playing music and in my own band and touring, and during that time I made very little artwork for a long time, until it became kind of necessity to make artwork for my own band, which led to me having that seen by other bands that I ran into on tour, played shows with, and then they started hitting me up to do work for their bands, and that kind of all snowballed from there. So it happened in a really organic way, but then it happened very quickly, where I'd come back from a tour and find I had a ton of commissions to do. And over time that just took over until I knew that that's really where I wanted to be spending my time and energy, was making artwork for record covers and gig posters and things like that. Although I think really for several years I was mainly just doing record covers, and the gig posters really came about in the kind of second half of the last decade, of just finding that to be just a much more playful place to be, like a lot more openness in it and a lot more room for variation and experimentation, versus when you're doing record covers, it's a lot more tightly constrained because you've got certain points you got to hit and certain expectations got to be fulfilled, whereas in gig posters you can really kind of cut loose a bit more. So I've definitely leaned into that more in the last few years. But I think the first time I connected with Arik was we worked on the first time. I think I was aware of Arik's artwork from High on Fire record covers mainly, and then I got invited to do a project for Mondo. It was the first project I did for them, and it was curated by Tyler Stout, and he brought in a bunch of artists to work on t-shirt designs based loosely on movies, but they weren't to be like they weren't going to be licensed pieces. They had to be sort of vaguely influenced by movies. So I was working on that, and when I looked at the other artists on the bill, at first I was super stoked to be doing something for Mondo, but then when I looked at the other artists on the bill and I saw Arik's name on there, I was like, holy shit, this is the coolest part of this thing, is just seeing. I didn't know what Arik looked like. I hadn't met him, didn't know anything about him apart from just seeing all of these record covers. And when I saw his name and then kind of traced it back, I was just like, holy shit. And then I remember putting the artwork forward for it, and I pained over this artwork and got in such a hole trying to figure out what I was going to do with that really strange brief of being like something like a movie, but not directly from a movie. And Arik had done this genius piece, which was like a Star Wars Empire Tauntaun rider, but done in his style. So it looked like this ancient fantasy guy riding a Tauntaun. And I was just like, motherfucker. Just such a brilliant solution to this bizarre brief. But then we would have met at MondoCon, which is the convention that in Austin. So that has to be the first time we met, right?
Yeah, that's where we met in person the first time, and yeah, we hung out a lot at that.
I feel like we must have had neighboring booths at some point, or I mean, that obviously then became a thing of like looking out for trying to get neighboring things.
And then we also were together at we had a table together at Roadburn in 2016 or 17 or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This is 2015 on the screen. Is that sharing for you guys?
Yeah, that was a different one actually, but yeah.
All right. So that was another cross link that I saw. You guys were all doing Roadburn posters, and I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, David did that stuff first. He was there before either of us.
Yeah, that was 2011, and they had asked me to do like the main identity or whatever you call it, and I proposed like, how about I just contact a bunch of the bands and do it. I just got really ambitious about it. I ended up doing, I think, 8 band posters and then the main Roadburn poster. And I also proposed, that I have a table and sell, back catalog stuff. And it was an amazing, crazy experience, 2011. And now, and then since then, I feel like they've kind of just like gone with it and just had a different artist every year. That's the part of the series. But Roadburn's an amazing, it's just becoming this long running series. It's so cool.
Yeah, and they've really opened up the art aspect of it a lot too. I think you were the first one to
maybe Malleus did it. I think Malleus did it maybe 2010.
Oh, okay.
But not to that extent. Like
right. It seems like you were the first one to kind of turn it into a thing where the art was an attraction too.
Yeah.
You were doing these posters for the other bands, and since then they've really focused on it, and then even more so when Burlesque got involved in having their own side show of posters in the past few years.
And at this point, when you get to Tilburg, they have flags flying in the street with your artwork on it. It's like so cool.
Yeah, I think Becky was the first one to do that. And when I heard, she told me that they'd done that. And then I was just like, hey, if we're doing this, I want flags. I want the flag. And I kind of pushed them to get that done. But it's with that, I think it's some sort of, they got so much support from the city. Tilburg that it was some sort of community-based thing to fund or accept getting those flags put out throughout the city, because they're super supportive of it from a kind of tourist and art point of view, which is really cool. But the whole lineage of the sort of artist in residence making the posters for Roadburn, I was so fortunate because I kind of had both Arik and Becky Arik had done it a couple of times, I think, at that point, and then Becky Clunan, who's another good friend of ours, had done it the year before I did, I guess, or maybe the one before that. But that both you guys were coming to me and kind of saying, hey, I really think you should try and get in on this, and I think you'd be a good person to pass the torch to, and chatting to Walter, who runs Roadburn, about it. But I think both you and Becky had briefed me by, because I hadn't been to Roadburn at that point. I'd been so lazy on it because it's so close for me, but it seems really far away. And when something's on your doorstep, often people will travel from the other side of the world to visit these festivals. But when it's just out in Europe, like, I just hadn't really thought about going out there. And I had these guys sort of petitioning me saying, if you should do this, but you need to go there first for a couple of years so you understand the whole thing, and then you'll be in a position to do it. You can't just breeze in, not really knowing anything about the whole deal, and just present some artwork. Like, you've got to really become a part of it. And to me, I was like, hey, there are loads of cool, there's like a ton of other festivals in the UK that maybe in my mind from the outside were like, have, you know, loads of heavy music festivals or whatever, and I didn't really, if I'm honest, I just didn't know the appeal of Roadburn was just like this other festival. And then when I went out there, of course, I completely got it. I was like, holy shit, no, this isn't like another festival. And everything about the way the bands are curated, the interaction between bands and the audience and everything is, and the curation of the music, the whole deal was just so different. And so I did that. Yeah, I went out there for 1 year, and then I remember being in the crowd, and Walter came over to me. It was really weird, actually, because it's like he's omnipresent. I don't know how he ended up being there. I'm in a crowd of thousands of people, and Walter just came over to me and and kind of said, "Hey, I'd really love you to do the artwork next year." And I was like, holy shit, yes. Some weird serendipitous thing of just being there at that moment. But and then just went all in on it. And
you have to practice drinking beer for 3 days without end.
Exactly.
For a couple of years before you can actually
I was pretty good at that. So,
And hey, Richie, you had mentioned the Ohm series coming out of David's catalog being one of the crossovers that you saw, or one of the pieces that drew you to his work, correct?
There's a few in this series, if they are, you know, that I've seen a lot, David, in the on posters specifically, where you really incorporate pattern into the work a lot in those, whether it's like on this one where you see it on the fabric, or where you see it in the border. And I don't know, I find something myself really fascinating about that. I love to, I know it's not easy to do, and yet if ever I've tried to do it myself, there's something really cool about being able to make an illustrated piece, but which is very organic and free flowing, but then be able to find a discipline in pattern making and smash the two things together into one piece.
I think it's that organic nature that you're mentioning that kind of drew me to David's work as well, that it has how he works his natural flavor into his patterns is very unique. And I really always appreciate, especially like this piece here, he likes to use alternatives to standard line work. He steps outside of what I think of as normal blocking and bordering on stuff, where you're just drawing an outline and filling it in. And he tends to, I really love how he thinks in textures. Again, on this piece, like the feathering texture is really beautiful, but it doesn't stand from an outline piece filled in it. It stands from the very texture of the ink work that he's done to it.
I think the framing of it as well on all these pieces, the idea of coming from a place of, like, I wouldn't have thought to do that. You know, it would, for me, I would think of either making a solid block frame or having just a free form pattern, but because of the symmetry around it, and then building these more pattern based ornate structures around it.
They have a hum to them just in how they set on the paper.
Well, thanks. I don't know what to say. It's like most of these, like, so this one on the screen is the main chunk of it is one drawing, but something like the border I would draw separately and piece it in. But I try to keep everything drawn in pieces, and then I'll kind of assemble it later. But the goal is to really like do most of it, like 90% of it, as one drawing.
This first one, the Austin one, that's just an outstanding piece, and it kind of goes into the split fountain technique that I see coming out of your work quite a bit as well. It's just gorgeous stuff. You did it on the prints that we did for the shop, and they're just gorgeous. You know, you step outside of the standard black line work, and I mean, there's not a touch of black ink in this piece, and that's just beautiful to me. You know, it steps outside the norm, and the patterns, everything about it. It's a gorgeous piece. So I want to make sure that's got mentioned.
That's super. I didn't know how that was going to go. Yeah, like he said, that's just one split fountain. That's it, on an orange paper. So people seem, I don't know. I guess it went well, but I didn't know how that was going to happen.
That's crazy to think, like, from a screen printing point of view as well, that they're just doing that in one hit. So kind of like one. I mean, I know there's a technicality to getting the split fountain even and consistent, but in terms of just like it's one screen, you know, so that's like
exactly
pretty economical. But yeah, the results amazing.
And I think,
hey, guys, I'm going to take a pause here real quick and use this opportunity to let's do a giveaway of a couple prints. And I'm going to switch things up. And since we're on the topic, we've got a couple of Ohm 14 by 14s.
12 by 12.
12 by 12, sorry, 12 by 12s. So we're going to do a quick giveaway here. And then a couple handbills, one of Eric's and one of David's for the shop the last couple of years. So if you'd like to get in on the David DeAndrea giveaway, let's do DeAndrea. Go ahead and you want to email that to, mysterytube@trips.org. You can go ahead. Oops, sorry. You want to go ahead and put it in the chat. My fault. Go ahead and put it in the chat. Put DeAndrea, and Marty's going to pick a winner here in just a few minutes and let me know who that is. And yeah, moving on from there. Sorry. Marty will tell us who that is in just a little bit. Any other favorite gigs that you guys have worked on that, you know, you did an incredible run of posters for them. And, you know, looking through any one of your catalogs, you can kind of see that veins run through them. Are there any favorites that you really enjoyed working for? Richey, your stuff for Metallica, holy cow. Stuff for the Grateful Dead, were those like landmarks in it, or?
Yeah, the Metallica stuff, what I like about that brief of working for them is I like to work in different styles and different tones. You know, some stuff I like to make that the aim is to make it really beautiful and ornate and decorative. Some stuff with the Metallica artwork, the aim is to make the most metal thing you can, you know, and that's like there's a delicious brief. It's just like, make the most metal thing. And I remember reading one of the first ones I did, I remember reading this interview years ago with in Kerrang magazine probably, or Rock Sound or one of them, with Stephen Brodsky from Caven, and he was talking about being a teenager and going into a record shop and picking up Ride the Lightning and seeing the cover and being terrified by it. And I was thinking, right, I need to, for some reason I'd read this years ago, you know, but then when I came to make the posters for them, that was in the back of my mind. I was like, okay, if I'm appealing to that audience, I need to make something like that. London one, I guess, is a different tone to it, but the stuff like that, the moth one I did with the skull, the more kind of brutal, intense looking one, my aim was to try and make something look a lot more sinister and scary and metal and intense to appeal to that same kind of that audience. Anyway, I did the piece, and the one it was for one of their newer songs called Moth into Flame, and it was like a skull with these big moth wings, and it was kind of similar to the Cthulhu piece I did, I guess, but it kind of came full circle, because then years later at Roadburn, Caven were playing, and Stephen Brodsky, I met him there for the first time, and he was wearing the t-shirt with the moth skull on it, and like he knew that I'd made it, and I had this sudden realization, and I said to him, I was like, oh, you know, actually it was something that you said years ago that influenced me to draw that t-shirt. And he was like, oh, well, the reason I got it was because it was the first thing I'd seen in years that felt like the thing that I liked about Metallica, being this scary band. I was like, well, you actually directly made that happen, you know, which is just like this really weird loop of inspiration. But yeah, that's the most fun part of it, is just being like, okay, how can you make something that's just super fucking metal? And I like to do that. Like if I made something that was really like dark and metal looking, probably the next thing I'd want to make would be covered in flowers. And you know, I think if you go real far down one road and you kind of expend that energy on it, then you want to always flip over to something else straight after. But yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Here's the, see if I can get this pulled up here for you.
Richie, which poster of yours did you feel like was kind of your first, or like maybe not even necessarily your first, but the first one you were like this is what I'm gonna do?
Oh, 100% the Grateful Dead poster.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for sure. Because I think I'd done a few posters before that, but hadn't really figured out. I mean, I kind of, there's times when you go in circles with it, I guess, but I hadn't figured out how to do it in a way, you know, like this, a lot of it looks easy. And then when you come to do it, or it's more about finding, how do I do it as an artist? What do my posters look like? You know, I can do it, but what do mine look like? How can I find a voice in it? And you know, there's some, well, I've kind of struck out in different directions, and to me that they haven't been successful in my eyes, and experimented with things and then pulled back. And a lot of it is to do with typography, the idea of like, do I draw that typography by hand, or do I use, you know, digital fonts and different things? And I feel like this one, I solved a lot of those puzzles with it. Things like stacking a lot of the information off the image at the bottom, because I could never figure out how to integrate it with the illustration a lot of the time. So that was one thing, was like, oh yeah, if I make just a band at the bottom, almost like you would in a, I've done it more since really, but like you would in a movie poster where you just have the image and you stack everything at the bottom, and then you don't have to worry. And maybe the band name is incorporated, but it doesn't have to be really tied in with the illustration. Although I did draw the writing, I guess I did draw the band name by hand, and I've got more back into that recently, because there's something nice about, I think you kind of know if it's hand drawn, and it obviously harks back to a certain era. But this is a weird one, because it's like I did it, and this was definitely the poster which I made in the gig post world, where I was like, I've arrived, like I've finally done something I'm proud of, and feels like I've got a vibe and a look and all this stuff. But then it was also a bit of a lightning in the bottle moment, where I haven't tried to recreate a poster that looks like this since, but I almost know that I can't. It's like, I don't remember how I did it. It was like an Elves and the Shoemaker kind of weird. I was in some sort of trance when I made it. I don't know. I don't remember drawing off of it.
I would have to say your only ones I could compare would be like the Cannabis Cup series here. That's but I don't think they, you know, they don't translate quite the same way. I feel like these go into more of a true homage to the Alphonse Mucha French Nouveau actual flavor, where it was birthed, where when we get into the Grateful Dead, you've clearly taken it a step away from there and gone into your own style. It's really evolved a little bit. It's different, but not to say those Cannabis Cups aren't beautiful, but the difference, you know, and that's really, you know, it's interesting. The Cannabis Cup is actually later in the series, you know, but that's what I think the difference is for me, where that's one of the beautiful things about your work. I do feel it draws from that French Art Nouveau movement so beautifully, and I'm a huge fan of that. And it times, yeah, like I would say the Grateful Dead piece more transcends that overall flavor of just straight Art Nouveau.
Yeah,
I think one of the great things about that Grateful Dead piece is that you took it back to something that the Grateful Dead and other bands from that era of the late 60s especially were using, which was, you know, influence from art such as Art Nouveau. And you kind of made something that was on par with or better than what would have originally been made for them, because a lot of their artwork, in my opinion, had become so recycled and so typical and so watered down and you know, sometimes uninteresting and kind of, you know, lifeless in a lot of ways, as you know, as they went on into the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and you know, and you brought what the spirit of this really classic poster art from the era originally had, which was you know, influences from that time period, and it's got the soul of that as well, which,
I guess,
as I said, I think had been lost a lot over the decades.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that, which I only kind of realized later on, was that in a lot of those images, if you look at like the Victor Moscoso work, really it's a lot of it's collage too, you know, like the images used of the female figures are taken from the old like Seagreaves Follies and things like that. Like,
we had this discussion at the shop not yesterday that I don't know that you could get away with what they used to do in the 60s anymore, because you'd get nailed for misappropriating somebody's photos. But
I mean, one of the most famous things right above your right-hand shoulder.
This is a 1859. It's a witch's crew. Who was that? We just talked about that, Marty. That's David
from the
O'Sullivan.
Rivet.
And you know, it's widely believed that that's Mouse and Alton Kelly. It's an appropriated image, you know, as are, you know, everything that's behind me, you know, except for probably Rick Griffin. You know, it's they're all using elements. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about the poster movement, is it allows you to combine these elements that you couldn't otherwise do because of the very medium that we're in. It allows you to cross boundaries that otherwise it wouldn't make sense. But when you put it in a rock poster context, you can get away with putting Bruce Lee in a Beastie Boys poster, or 1800s skeletons in a Grateful Dead poster, and they look natural.
And how they like how those guys in the 60s would have pulled it. It was such a punk rock kind of, it's a punk thing really, you know, like what they were doing is pulling out these old photographs, sticking them, I mean literally physically cutting things out, drawing the typography, piecing them together, using whiteout on them and taping together for, you know, that, and then making the screens from them, or the lithograph medium they were using. That is, you think of that era being all obviously peace and love, but actually the way that those artists were operating was just like, come on, just like, I'll do whatever I want. I'm going to pull these images together and I'm going to reappropriate them.
Literally pull these images together out of libraries. I mean, we're not taking images from the internet either. I mean, they're just pirating images. And that was, you know, like I said, I don't think you can quite do it that way anymore. Anytime, you know, obviously Shepard Fairey was the line in the sand where all of a sudden every photo he used became scrutinized. And why aren't you citing your photographer? Why aren't you citing where your art came from and where that line came developed? That have you appropriated this image enough that it's no longer the original and it's yours? And, you know, that was an interesting discussion to get into, that I don't think you can get away with it quite like you used to in the original vintage era. And I also, again, I don't think many people realize how much it was done. It's everywhere, and it still is. And it's you know, it's interesting that conversations of appropriation of images, or, you know, where do you draw that line in posters? It's a very difficult one. Who is stealing an image versus paying homage to it? You know, it's a tricky spot.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know how we got there.
Well, yeah. I mean, that one, that Grateful Dead one stands out to me because, you know, with all due respect, like, it's still being printed and signed and sold, and it's like, it's not, it's from a different, you know, it's from an older source. But anyway, but the other one, I don't know if that's Kozik, the Beastie Boys one, but I mean, I'd have to say I wasn't interested in like reappropriating stuff back then, but Kozik was a huge, and I'm sure for Arik too, he was a huge, you know, happening, because he was kind of he was one of the first to start doing posters for bands that were like stoner rock or heavy or metal. Whereas if there were posters back then, it was mostly indie rock. So regardless of the like image reappropriation thing, I think Kozik was pretty important back then.
Yeah, he was hugely important for me, because he was, I mean, he was one of the first to bring it back, as far as I was aware. Him and you know, Coop was pretty early too, but Kozik was at first.
The Wacky Studios, that whole scene developing out of Austin, it relit the fuse, and really, you know, he and Arminsky up in Detroit, it's amazing. They were both starting at the same time, and depending where you were in the country, you might have been focusing on one or the other. And then, the you know, Coop and Stainboy, all those guys coming out of the more pinup style, and they just blew into it. It was an amazing thing to see, and that's really what in my opinion, relit the fuse of the the modern era and really kind of set the tone for this is the way it's going to be versus what it was back in the 60s. The 80s was a dead time. There was nothing there. So yeah, I think it was interesting that it did light up again, and how it did. It's an amazing scene now.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find that other picture for you. This one for you. Anyway,
I'd have to say with Kozik, it was even more specifically like stoner rock or something like that. That really was like, you know, like he would do a High on Fire poster, or maybe put out the High on Fire, the first record, and like it was really interesting to me. And along with seeing what Arik was doing at that point, it was like it just clicked, you know, something in my head where, and then it just built from there, you know.
Yeah, he had such a good aesthetic with combining this retro interest of classic stuff, you know, a lot of 70s films and things, and then laying over, you know, using nice fonts and typography. Mostly, I'm thinking mostly of the Man's Ruin covers and things where he'd take an image that nobody really would bother to claim, you know, like an image from a movie or something, or some sort of 70s exploitation flick, and then put some font over top of it, and that would be the cover of the record. And it just looked really cool. It looked really retro, but also very modern. And I'd say that his style is probably, you know, influenced the modern age in the way that the 60s stuff did previously and still does. But yeah, at first when I saw his posters in the early 90s, I wasn't sure if he was redrawing these characters like the Flintstones and these Disney bunnies and stuff like that. I was like, did he redraw that, or did he actually, is that, I mean, then eventually, I mean, you know, Fred Flintstone smoking a joint or something, obviously he's done something to it that's different. But I couldn't tell at first if he was just like taking the comic art and you know, straight lifting it and then putting font on it. But then I realized, no, he's redrawing this stuff, and, you know.
All right, I got a quick winner to announce for the giveaway. First giveaway was Chris Merrick. Chris, you can go ahead and email mysterytube@trps.org and get them your contact info, and we will get those off to you. And while Arik's talking, let's go ahead and give away a couple of his pieces.
Am I talking?
We were talking.
Oh, I was talking. Let me think of something. Okay, that piece right there that you're holding, I'll say, that was a piece I originally did the artwork for Psycho Las Vegas, which was another thing that David and I had in common, which we did together one year, which was this huge music festival, which used to happen in California. It's called Psycho at that point, and then it moved to Las Vegas, got called Psycho Las Vegas, and now it's this massive production that happens at the Hard Rock Cafe. And it's anyway, the guy who organized it has reached out to David and I many times over the years to do things, and the artwork for that I did for the Psycho Festival and had different lettering. It had some lettering that said Psycho Las Vegas, and I removed that stuff and just made my own version of it.
And one more from Arik. You guys can go ahead and put Roper in the chat, and we'll pick a winner for Arik's as well.
That one you're holding, it's not supposed to be the Hells Angels emblem. Everybody thinks it is. And that's something that must have come out of the back of my mind, because I wasn't thinking about that as I was doing it. And people have said, I can't believe you did this Hells Angels ripoff. Look, I didn't. It just looks that way. It really isn't meant to refer to it at all. It didn't occur to me until later, and now I can see the resemblance. But you know, these things, that's how art works. You know, you sometimes subconsciously call up something that you have seen and you're not even aware of it, and then people will read into it or tell you that it looks like something else. And sometimes I disagree, and then sometimes I do agree. In this case, I can see what they mean, but not intentional.
Hey, just because I have it, can we quick steer back to Richie's Metallica piece? Since somebody finally got me a screenshot of it, I want to take a quick look at the skull moth piece for Metallica. Steal the screen a moment.
Yeah, that was the one that ended up on the t-shirt that I saw Stephen Brodsky wearing, that, yeah, brought that kind of weird little story full circle. But.
That's gorgeous. Sorry, I just wanted to hijack again for a moment.
Richie, I can really see I assume you did this on one of the clay panels.
I was just gonna say, I just had the realization, yeah, that was all done on the clay panel. Yeah.
So Richie and I both work on these clay coated masonite panels where it has a reductive line. Like they start white. For me at least, they start white and start inking, and then you can take the ink away. So it's like a scratch board effect. And when I see things from Richie, I can tell, just because I've used it so much, like that some of the marks are that scratch rather than the ink. And this one really shows it.
That's so cool. I never would have guessed that was evident and that you would be able to tell. That's really amazing. But yeah, it's an interest. I use it once, maybe one in every 3 or 4 pieces. Like I'll kind of, because it is a different way of working, and it's another thing which is nice to kind of flirt with for a while and then maybe go back to paper, but different benefits of each. But yeah, it's cool because you can basically draw out the piece as you would on paper and just positive black ink on white, but then you kind of get this extra kind of lap where you can just then go back in on it and highlight pieces by just scratching white back in, which is just like a real nice payoff to just bring all correcting mistakes, but you can do it to just like highlight stuff. And I guess with this one where I kind of have given it that kind of uplit horror kind of thing, I guess. So I guess it gave me the chance to get back in. In fact, I think this one was one that I painted over a lot and was just ended up, you get like 2 shots really. You can kind of, you draw over the black, then you can scratch back in, then you can kind of draw over the scratch stuff again if you want.
Yeah.
But it compromises the line so much that if you draw back into it, it's going to be kind of shitty quality. And you can sort of go back in a couple of times. But yeah, if you were on the original drawing, if you were to look at the surface of it, it's probably all sorts of little cavernous dents and stuff and things in it, which is kind of nice. You can kind of feel some texture to the actual piece.
That texture you pulled on the font as well, just the floating.
That is so much fun. That's
funky drop shadow. I don't know what's going on there. It's badass though.
It's got this weird kind of organic cobwebby. I don't really know what I did with it. It's almost like a wasp nest kind of flaky thing.
Yeah, I like that.
That's actually the thing that maybe 3 or 4 times now I've redrawn the logo, and it's so much fun to draw because like this one I did that flaky thing. On that London one I did a sort of classic breaking apart rocks thing, and it's just super nice because the logo is so incredibly iconic and powerful and timeless. And then to be given that and say, okay, I'll take this basic outline, bust it apart, and I know I'm making it into my own version of it, and but doing the blessing to be able to do it. And that's the most fun part actually of it, because there's no, anytime I've done that, I've just gone straight in and just kind of drawn it and had fun with it. And it's kind of, that's the actual image itself has been a lot of hard work, where that's the kind of payoff of the little treat is just drawing the logo, because it's just super fun and it's such a fucking great logo. It always works. It just always looks good. Like you don't
iconic is iconic. Yeah, they nailed it right from the start.
All the heavy lifting's been done, and it's just a lot of fun to work with.
Speaking of logos and lettering, I think Arik's one of my favorite with that ever. And I mean, aside from the obvious like Griffin influence, who would you say you looked at for that kind of stuff, Arik?
For lettering, aside from Rick Griffin, probably Roger Dean.
Yeah,
Roger Dean was such a big one for me when I was growing up, the way he did lettering, and I still am really impressed by the way he turned letters into a design in itself. You know, that is an art piece. The way he, yeah, I mean,
That's insane. That is really beautiful stuff right there.
Yeah, I struggle with lettering because I'm often not happy with it, and it's very easy to fall into patterns when you're doing the same kind of lettering. I mean, that kind of stuff is much different. Whereas I was playing around with creating these kind of angular metallic things, and you know, that's very fluid and more like the way I was originally describing. It's hard. It's easy to fall into patterns when you're doing these letters because, you know, how many ways can you make an E look different? How many ways can you make a Y look different? Oh wow, I've hardly ever looked at that poster.
There's a real beauty to it though, in terms of the I was going to bring this up actually when, you know, in terms of talking about each other's artwork, is what you see here, where I love, Arik, with the way you'll have very old ancient fantasy looking artwork, but sometimes then with very futuristic sci-fi text over it, which is,
You drew that line perfectly. Yes, I totally agree.
but also like there's one on that, the Earth, it's for the live performance of the Bees Make Honey in the Lion Skull, where it's that super more like futuristic writing, but with a super old worldy looking illustration. But in the stuff with the more freehand organic text, there's something really cool with that. It's like our own handwriting, you know, it's like everyone's handwriting. Even if you try and bust out of it, you don't know how do you land it on your handwriting, do you? No one does. You just write a certain way. And
Yeah.
I think the difference with the more angular stuff like that versus the organic stuff is that ultimately it's well, like you just said, oh, how many different ways can you draw an E? Like the truth is probably millions of different ways, but when you're drawing it, it's coming from you like your handwriting. So you're like, how many times I draw it, it comes back to being this thing, which is this weird unspoken language that only you could do. Like,
well, that's, yeah, and it's
I couldn't draw that same E. I could try and it wouldn't look the same because it's got your characteristic style in there, you know?
Yeah, that's why I find something really both challenging and satisfying about lettering is that it's more than drawing imagery. It's different because, like you said, lettering is something we use for mundane purposes where we write. And it's such a part of our thinking. You know, we think in language, we think in the way that we write. They're almost inseparable in the way that our mind develops. So when you're so used to seeing the way a letter looks, to warp it is to almost warp the way you're thinking about the language itself. And it's hard to not fall into those grooves that your mind is accustomed to. And so that's when I'm doing the fluid lettering, the hand-done lettering, that's what I'm trying to do, is to make it something that is not so expected or so much like the other versions I've done. And then if it is something that I'm using for a font, I manipulate the hell out of it so that I can, you know, get it to look like something that has a lot of character in itself. You know, I always change the kerning. I usually squash it. I put some kind of texture on it. I do a lot with the light. And I love the way that typography looks. You know, I'm a big fan of very simple, bold graphic design typography. So I appreciate that aesthetic as well, not just the fantasy stuff and the Rick Griffin lettering. I like it all. So I attempt to do different things with it. And but yeah, thank you, David, for
touching on what Richey was saying as well. I think, you know, I'm a huge fan of sci-fi and fantasy, and I think there's a very interesting line between the two, and you do a very good job of bringing the two together, whereas these fantasy worlds of literally worlds that you're building and then bringing in these sci-fi effects to them that really, you know, it's interesting. It's a really nice combination. I think a lot of people jam those two words together like they're synonymous, and they just aren't. I think you do a really interesting blend of see if I can find a good example. Where was that other one? there's work for the crows.
Yeah, well, like a lot of us, I grew up with that stuff, fantasy and sci-fi, heavy metal magazine, video games from the 80s.
There it is. I think that's, for me, that's a blend of two very different mediums that with the lettering, kind of going back to what you were saying about fonts too. I don't know that I would have put that font with that type of imagery, but they work so well together.
Yeah, I do like to mix it. I do like to put something modern with something that's not.
There was something that, yeah, exactly that. That's something I noticed, like on that the Earth Bees poster. I had that. There's something about it that I feel like, like the Star Wars a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away thing. The fact is like, wait, this was a long time ago, but it's the future. It's like that.
Right.
It's like something is this ancient, fantastical thing, but to us it's futuristic. And that I feel that same thing running through what you've done there, where you'll have what is, but it's almost like this retrofuturism as well, because it's like science fiction from the 70s, maybe, So it's like in the future, but it's in the past for us, but it's also in the future, and it's really cool. Yeah, it's a good marriage of different imagery and different themes.
Hey, I've got a quick winner for the Roper set. That's Juliana Pita. You can go ahead and send an email to mysterytube@trips.org, and we'll get that set off to you. And while Richie's going, I believe you had a few things you might, what'd you have on the block today, Richie? I believe you had something.
The giveaways.
Yep, you got something for a giveaway today?
I do indeed. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
This is one of a Queen's Finsbury Park poster, but it's a one of a kind that's printed on this strange, it's kind of like a matte gold, so it's kind of shiny, but not very shiny. But it's just a one-off test print, so I'm gonna
beauty. You guys can go ahead and type Beckett to the chat.
Proper gold metallic. It's like a strange matte version of it. It's kind of thick.
That is gorgeous. Are the stars above her head coming trailing off? Those are in the gold.
These are the gold busting through right there.
Oh, that's a beauty. Yeah, go ahead and Beckett to the chat. And I think I got a screenshot of that I can put up as well.
My friend Pokey, hey Pokey, is asking about process kind of in the digital realm. I think each of us use it like to a different extent maybe, but I mean, she's asking about like screen printing separations, which it's definitely not like by hand anymore in my case. I don't think anybody's here is doing that. But I think the thing that's kind of changed for me is the iPad, using Procreate in sort of the final or like last third stage of working, where for me, everything's kind of drawn, well, most of it's hand drawn and then scanned in and brought into Procreate and kind of composed a bit and added to and maybe taken, subtracted from a bit in Procreate.
I find that in terms of, I still tend to do most of my separations myself, but not as part of, it's not the end of the process. It's kind of just the way it comes together. Because I guess we all do this where you think in those terms, you build the idea for the poster, maybe thinking about how those screens are going to stack up. And in terms of drawing it, you're kind of or at least I am thinking about that the whole time of like, how is that going to translate and what's my end solution going to be so that I can present, kind of hopefully effortlessly present and say, hey, it's ready to print because I've made it that way. So the key line is there, I always think of it like a stained glass window and you've painted behind it, so you've got the key line there which locks it all down, and then you're just putting in these patches of color. And I've always had a battle with technology and computers and versus pen and paper, and some sort of that moralistic, I don't know what, that whole thing. And but if you look at something like Photoshop, it's just made for it because it works in layers. So it's like, hey, this is just the perfect way to construct those different elements together. And for me, I use it. I don't do too much in Photoshop, I don't think. I try and do as much by hand as I can, and then see that as just being a place where I can group it all together and put it in place. And I think I drifted for a while into getting a bit bogged down and touching things up. You'd scan them in and be like, oh, well, now I can infinitely correct things on it. And very recently, I realized how far I'd gone down that road, and a lot of it is completely pointless, actually. I've realized the beauty in it often is those little smudges and mistakes. And unless something's horrendously wrong and out of place, I try to not even look at it too hard, or look at it and actually kind of enjoy being able to say, I'm going to leave it as it is. I'll leave that little wonky line, or where the line doesn't join or whatever. Because actually, if any of us, if you're at a convention and you're presented with the opportunity to see like an original Frazetta sketch or something, like the things that we delight in is the fingerprints and the smudges and the whiteout and stuff, and it's part of that, but it's also keeping a vibrancy to it. Like if you overcorrect it, you just end up just really dulling. It's the same as Pro Tool music and just like quantifying everything, and that kind of kills it. So for me, I see Photoshop in the digital realm as being the place where you just pull it all together and say, okay, here's what I've made. Let's just find a way to present it so it can be printed. But I don't really spend too much time there.
Yeah.
The winner for the Richey Beckett is who we got here is Simon Dosh. You can go ahead and send an email to mysterytube@trips.org. Guys, I'm being asked who your dream band to do a poster for is. Got anybody you're gunning for still? Grateful Dead was a pretty good mark, I gotta admit, in my personal world.
What was that?
I mean, just for seeing what you guys have done, seeing you guys do Grateful Dead stuff, obviously hit very close for me. So those are, like you said, Richie, that was probably your closest to home where I started becoming really aware of you and really watching what you were doing. And so, those are the things that happen, I think, with any artist, is you see something that really sparks your interest, and suddenly it goes off in both directions, where you're watching what they're doing in the future, as well as you have to delve into what they did in the past.
From my side of that as well, is really interesting. Like, everyone knows about the culture of Grateful Dead and Deadheads. I definitely didn't know as much about it before doing that poster. Like I was not quite, like, I had a peripheral idea of it, but I wasn't quite aware of what I was getting myself into, in a way.
Right.
Just as you said, being that was what made you aware of what I was doing. And it's with doing that, I opened myself up to a completely different audience from what I had in the past, because suddenly, when that poster came out, my inbox is just stacked with emails from fans of Grateful Dead telling me their life story, of like beautiful things, amazing things, just these incredible interactions. It's like, I've never got this with posters for other bands before. And just stepping into that and getting a glimpse of that whole culture was like pretty intense, actually. But really cool. Yeah, it's definitely just a very different realm of appreciation for poster art coming with that territory. In terms of dream bands, I feel kind of almost afraid to. I don't want to say anything.
All right. Don't jinx it. I hear you.
But also,
they might be listening right now.
Yeah.
But I don't know. There's some where I'm kind of the super sacred ones. I'm almost like, I don't want to touch them, because it's I do feel like it changes my relationship with the band if you've done, because
Sure.
the way that all of us guys work, where we're working in a very labor intensive, it's not like you're just going to smash out a poster in a weekend. You're going to spend a few weeks on it and really have to put the hours in. So you spend so much time thinking about it and working on it and getting deep into it and researching the band, and that, you know, we all want to do it justice and not do some research for it. So when you come out the other end, I feel there's always this kind of a slight exhaustion of just having delved into that world for so long, and you're never going to quite, something about it just changes your relationship with that band, not necessarily in a negative way, but it does change it. So with some of those, if there are any that those real kind of dream gigs, I don't know if I want to change my relationship with certain bands. So
seeing behind the curtain thing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing, is that, you know, like there aren't any bands anymore that are on the pedestal that bands growing up were, because you could never meet, well, when we were young, we could never meet Led Zeppelin or Black Sabbath or whoever your idols were. But today you actually maybe could or have. And the separation is kind of nice, and especially with modern bands, you know, there's very little separation, and the mythology, you know, the magic, it gets diminished a little bit. Not that it's a bad thing necessarily. Sometimes it's really nice to know a band, and you can appreciate them more that way too. But I do miss sometimes that distance between me and this band that I'll never.
Right.
Yeah, because the magic is alive there, and I can imagine things that, you know, maybe they aren't.
Yeah, they're characters rather than actual human beings. And once you get to know people, it's like, oh yes, everybody's doing a job, and this is their job too. So I hear what you're saying. Yep.
Yeah, sometimes you don't want to know everything about a band, and today you just do, because, you know, it's easy to.
I'll steal that for Richie's Black Sabbath.
Right.
And Baroness as well. You guys have all done a bunch of work for Baroness. That Sabbath is sick. Hey, can we do one more giveaway for Arik and David? And I really feel we're going to need to talk about this anyways, because we haven't really got to this one, since it's the European version of the Oakland collaboration. Yeah, killer piece. Why don't you go ahead and put sleep in the chat, and that's the next one going up. That is a signed edition as well. That was kind of cool that all those got signed while you guys were at the shop, and nice to see signatures on. Again, you just don't know these things, that two people are working on a project across the country, and it's not as easy to get things signed as you might want.
Yeah, that was when we were at Furthur Frames. That was like the first time we were able to sit down and sign a bunch of these things we worked on together. And it was, you know, a few of them are still floating around maybe, but I think that was our most successful collaboration of the 3 or 4 we've done.
Yeah, that was the first one, I think.
Yeah.
That's the same poster as the Fox Theater.
Yeah, so that was
That's
for a show in Oakland at the Fox Theater, which was a crazy event in itself, because it's an old theater that had just reopened, and then they went to Europe and asked us to just do something on a smaller scale that could be more easily handled and stuff, and that's what that version is.
Yeah,
but it's the same art, different colorway.
Change the colors a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then if I remember, you and I talked about the idea, and then we decided to split it up by the planes, basically. Like I did the front, you did the background, which is how we did it in other ones too, because it just seemed to make more sense if you're working remotely to handle sections instead of trying to, you know, fuse it together so tightly.
There it is. Sorry.
Kind
of,
Yeah. So it's pretty like literal in this one, where Arik did like the cockpit, all the foreground framing and the lettering, framing everything, and then I just did the what you see outside the window.
Yeah.
That was the one thing.
Just the other half.
That's the thing I was most curious to ask you guys is in terms of the collaboration, the technical aspect of literally how you do it, especially on the one, I think it's the cultivator one as well. Just so I mean, you've kind of answered that already in a way of how doing those different planes, but then do you know exactly how much space that foreground is going to occupy, or have you drawn that whole landscape to fill the page and then put the, is the stuff that we're not seeing here that was drawn and kind of sacrificed because you wouldn't know exactly where someone's outline is going to be unless you wait for someone to do the first piece and then you relay it?
I don't think so, right?
Where does the passing back and forth happen?
Well, in this case, because I still have the drawings, that I did this one in about 3 or 4 pieces. So I think Arik had presented already like the foreground and everything pretty much ready. And I kind of like pieced this together later in Photoshop, at least my parts. And then, like, for instance, that the astronaut there was then used on an etching on the B side of the single later and stuff. So it's all in pieces for me.
Yeah, I know that I did a sketch of this originally as a proposal for an idea, and I said, "How about this?" And you agreed.
Yeah.
And I guess I don't remember exactly what happened first, but maybe I did like the black line work for my part, sent that to you so you knew what space you needed to work with.
Mm.
And then we each individually did our parts. And then you sent it all to me in layers. And I did all the color correction and
that was going to be my question. Who pulled that color palette? What an incredible palette to put together for that piece.
I always wanted to default to Arik with that part because he's just has a knack for it. It's really good. And then beyond that, maybe we should mention like Monolith Press. We're all working with Richey. I think it's usually burlesque, right? We're all working with these really great printers too.
Yeah, and that's another huge difference between where this started and where it's ended up. That I didn't know how to feel about that originally when, it was part of the process for the artist to do the print originally when I was seeing them coming out of Wacky Land. And, those guys were all hands-on, coming out of Firehouse. Any of these print houses were the artist doing the prints. And now I've definitely, it didn't take long to realize that, the guys and gals who are printing these posters now, it allows them to really focus in on doing that part of the job so incredibly well. People like the folks doing work at Burlesque. Wow. Just incredible attention to detail. Any of them, Monolith, they're really incredible groups that get to focus in on that aspect of the job. And it seems that they've allowed you as artists room to do what you want. And, they're going to figure out how to translate it for you. Just give them the image and let's figure this out down the road. And, just being friends with Ben at Burlesque, that's been an interesting experience to, see how much feedback or how much input, I should say, he has in working with his clients and, making suggestions on types of inks, any type of addition, and that he's clearly working with the artist. It's not just hand it off, here you go, print it up. And it's nice to see that that there's a collaboration there going on as well that you don't really, I don't think a lot of people are aware of, that there are these, you're not just doing this yourselves. There are these print houses that are doing incredible work. And I'm glad you brought that up because they're a huge part of the process.
Yeah, there was an interesting aspect to that for me early on with when I was learning how to set things up for print, people would start talking about Pantones and saying, hey, the best, and the printers would talk about it because it makes their job easy because then they're just like, hey, I just dial in this Pantone and then it's on me then, it's on the artist. If you said that color 526p, whatever, that's what it is. They can't do anything wrong, But the pitfall of that is, actually picking Pantones is a nightmare. Like I've tried to do it here and I'll be looking at them in the window, looking at them in the studio, looking at them in the corner, and they look different every time. And then I remember getting stuff done for, it was when there was the Black Sabbath exhibition in Greenwich in London. And I remember the first time I'd seen the print, and I walked in and I'd done this, it was the Wizard piece. And I walked in and saw the print for the first time, and I picked Pantones for it. And I walked in, I was like, they've got it wrong. How have they, he looked like fucking Santa Claus, like he was in green and, like white, red and green, and he was supposed to be like blue, whatever. And I walked in, I was like, those colors are not what I selected at all. And they were, you know, when it looked wrong to me, and I took it home, the poster, and I got the Pantone. I was like, yeah, I'm going to prove this. And I kind of got the Pantone, I put it next. I was like, holy shit, no, it is 100% the color I picked. But I hadn't taken account that when you put two colors next to each other, they behave differently, and they change the look of the color next to them, and all of these other factors.
Right, it's an effect of color blending.
If I said to Burlesque, oh, I want this to be something like this and this to be something like this, and to give them an idea of the colors and use their judgment to do it. So that was a big one, because I was like, I can't trust myself to pick Pantones, because in the end, I'm not there in the room printing them and seeing how it looks sat on the paper, because I'm using like speckle tone paper, and everything's throwing up off the colors. So in the end, we kept hitting a wall with it, where I'd send them Pantones and it would come out not being how I expect. And this is 100% on me, you know, it was not what I expected. So then I wrote back to him one time and said, can I just send you the file? And I know that people say the reason of Pantones is because maybe your monitors, the calibration on your monitor is different, and the lighting's doing all this stuff. But to me, relative to, no matter how you're seeing it, the colors relative to one another are going to still have some kind of truth to them. And
right.
So I pitched to Burlesque. I said, okay, the Pantone thing's not working. Can I just trust you? And it was like, I'll sign it off if needs be. You know, I'll sign to say, I'm paying for this print run, but I trust you to make a judgment based on literally looking at a JPEG on the screen of what I've proposed, and trusting you to know where I'm heading, and make a choice on when you're mixing those colors to get them to work together, and do that last little step of the way.
And that is,
ever since, it's been great. And the results every time is exactly what I've intended, and works way better than the Pantones. And I actually love that aspect of it, that they're playing a part in that process. Then it's up to their decision making. And that's a distinct part. Like, to me, the piece of artwork is not the pen and ink on paper piece at the start, and it's not the typography part. It's the final screen print. That's the piece of art, and
you didn't expect this, let's talk about it, stuff can happen. And it's nice to see when printers bring that up, or that I don't know that this is what you were after. And granted, we've had a handful of handbills printed at our shop, but I've definitely had those conversations where I don't think this is going to work quite what you had in mind, but we're going to make some tweaks that'll make it work. And I think that's the beauty of a good relationship between the artist and the printers, and why you see people like Mark Spusta continually working with Monolith, and why you got Lady Lazarus working for Jeff Wood, and it's how they communicate with each other, and that's I think a big part of the process. You guys want to do one more giveaway? You got another one, Richie?
I do. Speaking of Burlesque, this is one. This is like a crazy test print when I did the Cannabis Cup, Cup print. So it's got behind it, there's a screen from the Black Sabbath print. I only realized just now is like behind the text is kind of says Black Sabbath behind it. And then there's one of my older prints is printed behind it too. So yeah, it's kind of a weird abomination of many prints in one, but it's obviously a complete one of a kind weirdo print. Because
Richie said the word abomination. They'll put abomination in the chat. That's a nice long one for you. And we'll pick a winner there. The winner for the sleep collaboration was Andre Ribas. You can go ahead and send an email to mysterytube@trps.org. That's a beautiful piece, Richie.
Thanks.
All right.
Abomination. Great.
I'll say that's kind of a testament to how Burlesque kind of is. They display and value these test prints. It's amazing, and they actually treat them as if like because those posters weren't all of yours weren't all printed on the same
There was,
time. They must save them and then
years old, and they'll sit on I don't know exactly how they do it, but they'll stack them up and leave them for like 3 years or something, and then run them through again. There was one I had before, I've got here somewhere. This is one that I have kept. I think it was a Metallica piece that I'd done, but they had one of Arik's prints, and it was the one that's got those sort of old kind of primitive man ape guys in the trees, and they test printed Arik's print, put it to one side, and then at some point put my Metallica print through. But by some weird serendipity, they'd lined up so the Metallica writing is there, and this weird primitive ape guy is sitting on top of the logo just by chance, you know, and another guy's kind of creeping through the logo. It's just amazing. Like suddenly it's this unintended collaboration piece. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah, that's great. I'm surprised they keep the screens around that long, because normally I would think they would wash them off as soon as the job was.
I think
That's just a test print.
But they would have test printed yours and then just kept the piece.
Yeah, they're keeping the paper, not the screen.
Again,
of course.
And then flipped it over, because also on that piece it's got some other artwork on the back of it. So there's always, I'll get the test prints through and then flip them over, and there'll be like Tara McPherson piece on the back or some other crazy thing. Like, Jim Phillips or something.
And sometimes Ben will just experiment himself and do some weird variation and just throw it in there and say, hey, check this out, how do you like this version that I did, where I changed the colors and
pull a metallic powder out of his grandpa's pack that he used to have, and some rare metallic or some rare pigment. You're getting the last of it. I always love that about Ben. He's got some strange trick bag of pigments and metallics somewhere in the back. Some rusted old can he likes to dip into.
That's the good shit. Yeah. We've been talking about Ben and I have been talking about doing a piece where we make screens, but we make it as a square piece so that then he can, so if it was things that don't have to necessarily be lined up, so if it was like a marbling pattern and then a piece of line work, but then as they put them through, you can flip them 90 degrees and then come up with all these completely trippy, one of a kind, pieces. We've been talking about it for ages, and I just need to put it into action.
Excuse me, I got something to show you while you continue talking here.
I actually had the chance to go out there in 2015 and do sort of an art print with Ben, but mostly in my kind of came up with Monolith Press. I mean, Mouse printed my earliest stuff before Monolith even, and then also in later years Broken Press in Seattle. But
Richie, this is exactly what you're talking about. A friend of mine used to do these witch spells where they're 4 layers of lettering, and each time you turn it, it reveals a different page of the spell, but they're printed over each other in 2 colors so that the words blend together. So each page of the spell is turned 90 degrees.
Wow, that's smart.
And I'm going to take this opportunity to show you another one.
Somebody is asking a question about Arik and NFTs. I don't know if we should. I don't know if we should let that overtake the conversation.
To that question, you can email me about that, because that's too much to get into. But I'd be happy to answer if you want to email me about that.
There's the wedding painting my friend did for us as well. And it's done in the same style. And we sat one night and came home after a show, and words were just blooming off the piece at us. It was amazing. So it's 4 layers of wording. We can turn it any way we want. And it was really amazing to see how it kept changing over the course. He used to do whole series of these paintings, but that's interesting you brought that up. It'd be interesting to see what you did with that. And I believe he always told me that was how they wrote witches' spells, so that they could pass the spells among each other, but you couldn't read what they were. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but I thought that was an interesting piece that you brought up there.
Some good questions in the chat here if anybody's
Yeah.
looking.
I mean, I would say, Gerald, the straddling the line between art and advertisement. I mean, I don't know. It's really, I don't know. There's so much, it gets complicated sometimes, or sometimes it's just really simple. I mean, I think we're kind of riding the wave of what, the early like people established, Rick Griffin or Victor, like just the way they were the first to kind of, make that kind of object that's an advertisement, but also a piece of art. And is obviously that's changed over the years. Now it's like there's so many posters happening and to different levels of like collectability, and like it gets super complicated. But I just think that I don't know if I think about it too much. Only I think maybe I think about it occasionally when it comes up in like limitations of like how many posters you can make and the editioning, and it's I think the band and art combination is just already kind of been established, and then it could work in a few different ways. I don't know.
That's the idea of it being the crossover between advertising and art is interesting though, because I feel like the origin of gig posters obviously would have been make a gig poster, post it all around town
Yeah.
to promote the gig. Now, a lot of the posters that us guys work on are not revealed till the day of the show.
I know.
So it's like it's not an advert for anything. Of course, it's
Mhm.
it's an art piece to celebrate a show, as everyone already has their tickets. And which, when I think about that, actually, it's got me thinking, hey, we don't have, maybe that should offer us more leniency to not worry so much about legibility and about promoting a show which is already happening right now. So yeah, definitely the agenda has changed. It feels like most of the posters we're making are commemorating a show at the time it's happening, rather than
They're keepsakes more than their advertisements more.
They're also
Yeah.
merchandise.
Right.
They're a commodity in that sense, which benefits the band hopefully. So it's not a bad
Yeah.
thing necessarily, but it's not an advertisement per se. It's a piece of artwork that goes with that particular show.
But I like the thing that's always I find exciting and interesting, and with the sleep stuff, it's different because you've exploded into this whole other world of imagery. But in most cases, with a gig poster, you've got such freedom to it, and the brief is very often just. Sometimes you'll get given like, okay, here's the things you can't do, but anything else is good as long as it looks cool, and that's all you really. It's a great place to then it's kind of like a book cover for the show. It's just coming up with a cool imagery, a cool piece of imagery to sort of represent the show, and it doesn't have to be I don't know, it feels like a great experimental pool for artwork, really. I don't think you're too constricted by the kind of advertising side of it. It's not like you've got someone on art directing you saying, we really need to sell this show. We need to sell some tickets. You need to really need to convince people that they cannot miss this show. Like that's
Right.
not your thing, is it? It's
Yeah.
which it makes
You want it to represent more than, yeah.
That only happens if you're working with an art director who's using this for some sort of record packaging thing, and then can be oppressively so.
Yeah, I would say the details of like how that works there's been so many different situations in my career so far. I think the ones I like most are just the direct, like for me with Godspeed You Black Emperor, just like direct communication and a band that's like sells tons of posters, they sell them cheap, and like it just, for me, that's one of the high points of that, like that sort of collaboration with them.
Yeah.
All right, we're going back to sleep, and let's round out our giveaways tonight. Oh, man. Let's talk about the cultivator, ladies and gentlemen. The word is cultivator. That is the collaboration, correct? Yes. David and Eric's collaboration. Beautiful print.
Can you guys talk about how you piece that? Because hearing you talk about that, the other piece is super cool to know how you broke it down. How did you break down that piece?
What was that movie, Eric?
Silent Running.
Silent
Yeah.
Running.
It's
Oh, for real? Holy cow, that's awesome.
That was the idea that I guess, did I suggest that, David?
I don't know if it was you or Al. It wasn't me.
Oh, yeah, good question. I don't know if it was me or Al. I thought it was me, but I think I'm not sure.
Regardless,
I was going to say, but anyway, that aesthetic is kind of what we're going for with that, this greenhouse in space. Or maybe it was that I kind of turned it that way based on these. Okay, well, you had established this dome greenhouse in space from the first poster. So that was there from something you had done. And then Al says, hey, let's do this new poster, The Cultivator.
Mm-hmm.
And that was before there was a song called The Cultivator on the last record. Is that right?
I think so.
Did I make that up? I don't know.
I don't know.
But this was before that, if that is actually a song. So I just immediately thought of Silent Running, which has a great aesthetic design in itself. I thought about this character who tends to these weed plants, which there's kind of the story in my mind.
Bruce Dern with a bunch of robots in space, right? He's just with his androids.
Right. Well, maybe that's the other robot that Bruce Dern left in charge when he blew up the rest of the ship. But yes, so the idea is basically that this character here tends the weed plants in this dome in space, which kind of feeds into the storyline of the other parts of the Dope Smoker album, which we've alluded to different aspects of it. So it kind of fits in there. It's another piece of the puzzle, but it was all prompted by Al suggesting it. This all comes about because Al says, hey, let's do another poster. Let's make it. It's not always, he doesn't always have an idea at first. Sometimes we throw out some things, but
I'm a big fan of the border on this one. I love those metallic borders, and
yeah, that's all David. He did
as
the border.
As a framer, you make it difficult for me, but I love them.
Yeah, that was another one. Like same process. I did the foreground, the plant in the front, and the character in the machine, and then David did the background and the frame.
Mm-hmm.
I believe.
I noticed he's got it looks like a guitar headstock as his belt buckle.
Yeah, that's something I established with the Weedian. They all have Rickenbacker head buckles.
Oh, no way.
That's on the Weedian too.
That's so cool, because that the thing that struck me about that, I recognize it as a guitar headstock, and there's something cool about seeing something in such a weird context. Like you don't expect to see a piece of a musical instrument out in space in this, cosmic greenhouse.
And looking around to find Tony Iommi in all their prints as well, figure out where he ended up in any given one.
Yeah, he's in there. I think at some point, David, I think it was Jason said, hey, maybe we should tone down the Iommi stuff.
Yeah.
We get a call from his
Totally.
lawyer one day.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like to put little details like that, like the belt buckle, and because I feel like that's so iconic of their sound is Al's Rickenbacker bass and the green amplification. The green amplification is kind of what informs a lot of their green imagery for me. I always think back to that green Rickenbacker bass he had years ago, and the green amplification and the obvious other green references with them. And this was a really fun one. I had a good time with this one, and came together pretty well, I think. And we did a foil version of that as well.
The weird thing for me with that is that I think you said David did that background to it, and despite all of the detail in it, the bit for me technically that gets me excited is just that wireframe of the dome, just the white lines, just the simplicity of, well, it's very complex, but in terms of density, it gives structure to it, because you've got just that nice open space to let the logo sit over it and have all the weight at the bottom. In terms of an actual pattern and the perspective of it is complex and confusing.
Yeah.
But in terms of not overworking it and just having those fine lines there, it just works beautifully.
Yeah, that was Arik. Arik did that, and I remember not understanding. Like, it was a question as to how he was going to figure that out.
Yeah. You asked me to put that in. You're like, can you get this geodesic paneling in here? The funny thing is, a couple of years after this was done, like just a couple, maybe 3 or so years after we did this, I was asked to do the cover for the Blu-ray release of Silent Running for Arrow Films. So I ended up doing a pretty similar thing with Bruce Dern and the robot looking out the dome with these plants around them for the 4K 4K Blu-ray release.
Did you sneak a weed plant in there somewhere?
No.
Not that we know of.
I think it's implied, though. I mean, what
if you're floating through space with a garden?
Yeah, I mean, if that wasn't in that dome, then what's it all for?
What's the point? All right, I got 2 winners to announce here. For Richey's Cannabis Cup, Buffy Marie. Buffy, you can go ahead and email mysterytube@trips.org. And for the cultivator is Robert McDonald. Robert, go ahead, MysteryTube, get your information off to them, mysterytube@trips.org. And that is our giveaway set for the day. Wow, those are some great pieces for you guys to put up for the block. Wonderful. We are running on an hour and 45 minutes. It has been outstanding having you guys here to chat. Anything else? Any other questions there? I'm not actually following this.
Yeah, I only just busted open the question panel. I'd seen the chat, but I didn't see the Q&A. So I don't know if we want to answer some.
There's one here. I mean, there's several. We can each take some and talk briefly about them. But there's one here from Chris. It says, how do you guys not get discouraged with the business aspect, like asking certain prices, licensing, royalties, and all that? I find myself getting very confused with all that stuff. Well, let's see. That's a pretty wide-ranging topic there. I think in the case of gig posters, for example, like we probably all do ones where we have some relationship with the band.
Yeah.
Perhaps not somebody like Metallica, but the ones we choose to do, I'll say that we are interested in doing and therefore choose to do, is a situation where we make a deal with the band, I would assume, where we're either getting paid something that we're happy with and we get some of the posters, or we get enough of the posters that we feel that we can sell them and get some compensation. Licensing doesn't come into play with posters for me, and royalties don't either. It's either a flat out rate or getting posters to sell. And that being said, I'm not, I feel like the prospect of getting a bunch of posters to sell as payment is not interesting to me, because I don't want to have to sell posters unless it's a couple special posters. If it's something really nice that that I feel like I can sell, then that can be interesting. But I've had bands come to me and be like, hey, you want to do the poster, and we'll give you half the posters to sell. And I'm like, well, that's just more work for me on top of the work of making the poster. And I don't want to have to sit on a bunch of posters and sell them all.
I don't know. For me, it's kind of it's different now because I don't really run my own fulfillment operation. So I'm in I'm in a weird place between those two points. But in the past, the way I've made it work has very much been through accepting the APs and the posters to sell and having some longevity out of that. And in terms of licensing, it kind of doesn't come into play because if for me, my currency is selling posters. So if I'm doing a one-time run of 150 posters, even if I had the license, I couldn't reprint them because it's a limited run. So the license is not really a conscious thing unless I wanted to stick it on. Sometimes it's annoying if you're like, I'd love to stick this on a t-shirt, but so-and-so owns it, whatever. But in terms of posters, actually the way that I've got to there, from there to here and managed to make a living from it is because the fee that you're paid up front for doing a poster, you hit the ceiling pretty quickly on what that can be. There's not that much money in it. But if you can, I think from an artist's point of view, you can have actually a lot more agency than you might realize in terms of making some demands about getting APs of posters and things like that to sell, or being able to print your own art prints of a piece. And sometimes all you got to do is ask. Like someone might approach you and say, hey, can you make this poster for this thing or this record cover or whatever? And the numbers don't really add up because you're like, well, I'm going to spend probably 2 or 3 weeks working on this thing and I'm going to get paid. And it's on me because I take so long to make the artwork, but it doesn't add up. But then if you can approach them and say, hey, how would you feel about me doing 100 art prints of this? And in most cases, they're like, whatever. They don't care. Like, why would it affect them? They'd be like, yeah, go ahead. No problem to them, but it's a big deal to you as an artist because then you get some just some longevity out of it, and you can you can make a lot. It's financially you can make more than you might have made from a straight up fee with it. I think. It'd be nice to be able to maintain license for things. If you work with smaller bands, don't care about licensing. They're like, no, the art's yours, whatever. Bigger bands they don't want to have to worry about it, so they want to monopolize it all and know that they have the license to it. So they're just like, no, full licensing all the way, which is that's a bit of a bummer if you've made a piece you're proud of and you want to be able to repurpose it and you can't. But but even in those cases, even if I'm selling the full license to something, I'll still intercept and say, hey, can I make 100 art prints of it? And no one's ever said no to it, because as long as they know there's an end to it, as long as they know there's a limit, they're like, yeah, that's fine. As long as you're not printing it for the rest of your life,
Yeah, I've been more inclined to take that approach too, where, I have an online shop and I have everything to efficiently like send posters out. So I don't know, it's always different, but I would say if you're looking for like advice, just like as an artist, try to stay fluid. Don't try to think that something's set in stone. Every deal is kind of different. And in my experience, the best way to do it, I don't know how like realistic this is, but find a band like that you're friends with that is so psyched that you're making the art, and then just build from there. Like, don't try to go for, Grateful Dead first. Like, just try to build it. I mean, that's the way it happened. It happens like that, I think, a lot. But just stay fluid, I think.
Yeah, getting involved with bands and staying consistent with them can really help because you can go places with the band.
Exactly. I mean, we got pretty lucky with timing, I think, both of us.
Oh yeah, certainly.
I think that plays into it, but how would you really know? Like, you just have to, in your own scene, just start making art, start making flyers, whatever, photocopied flyers, anything like that.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting that you two are prefer to get a lot of copies and sell them yourself. Yeah, that's my approach is a little bit different, just because I don't know. I kind of
need to come to the Hall of Flowers more often.
What's that?
Come down to trips to the Hall of Flowers more often.
I know it's probably because I work with such limited space, and I have to have someone else do all my fulfillment for me. So
yeah, don't get into doing your own. Like I've been trying to shake that off for years, and only now I'm finally outsourcing my fulfillment. But I spend a lot of time. I think a lot of people don't realize that it's the artist sitting there going through printing out address labels and doing all of. And I feel like I've done my time on that now. So
yeah,
I don't mind it. I kind of like it, but
there is something appealing about it. There's a nice. It's a complete switch up of what you're used to doing. So it can be quite kind of meditative as well. But I just looking at these questions again, because it'd be cool if we could answer like.
Richie, I was curious if you had one of those clay blocks handy. Somebody was asking if they could see one. I know. Are you in your studio?
Yeah. I might even have.
Quickly, I'll answer this while Richie's away. Benjamin is asking about the Matt Pike's book, David.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, we both did artwork for Matt Pike's new book, which is called Head on a Pike, the illustrated lyrics of Matt Pike. That's what it is. That's all we know too. It's several artists, David and I, and Skinner and Derek Snodgrass and help me out. Santos.
Pretty much they got together everybody that's done High on Fire artwork throughout the 20-something years.
Yeah. And I assume to illustrate songs basically. Yeah. So that's what the book is going to be. I don't know if there's more to it than that, but that's about as much as we know. And yeah, coming out soon, I think.
Yeah, that's trippy for me and Arik too, because I mean it's been 20 plus years. I think the band is 21 years old, and it was some of our first stuff, really. I mean, for me, there was a particular T-shirt that felt like the first thing of mine that got around a lot. And
yes, that was a good shirt. Yeah, I really liked that one too, and I still have that one actually.
Oh man, and that was 90, 98, 99, something like that. So.
Yeah.
Those the clayboards. I've only just from busting that drawer open. I when we spoke about it earlier, I hadn't realized how many pieces I've actually done on clayboard, and a lot of them are on clayboard. So that's the Metallica one. It's tiny. Look how tiny it is. It's really small. That's that one. Obviously, there's no background on it. It's just the artwork drawn and then scratched back into. That's the Queens of the Stone Age piece that we saw earlier.
Is that one hand inked, or is that, do you hand ink those first?
Yeah, so the piece, the board would be white originally, and then I've painted all of this ink in myself and just drawn into it, but then scratched back into it as well. This one is this is on clayboard. This is that Foo Fighters artwork piece. I am always surprised myself by how small they are, because I'm used to seeing them at poster size, but obviously this is like tiny. But so that's all done on clayboard as well. But so the board itself is literally, a piece of board with this white surface on it. And then, or you can get these, what they call cradled, which are like this, where you get an actual like chunky piece of board with it. But yeah, they're super fun and versatile to work on. This one is the Queen's one. That's the original.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Illustration for that.
You get the sheen on those that I don't think, a lot of people don't appreciate.
It's just the 9 Inch Nails Royal Albert Hall. It's really shiny, but that's the Royal Albert Hall illustration.
Oh my.
Yeah, I kind of forget about, like I draw them, and when I finish with them, as soon as I scan the piece in, I kind of put it in a drawer and just forget about it and never really look at them again.
Yeah, same here. Tons of these things.
But weird, the relationship you have with them.
Yeah, and I think the thing about this particular, the clayboard stuff, it just really, once you scan it in, it translates to screen printing because it's very contrasty. And for me, I don't think I've worked on paper in a decade. I mean, here and there, but I've taken to this stuff really well too.
So you do most of it on clayboard?
Yeah, I've had a few here. Here's something I did for last night's celebration here in Olympia to Cernunnos. But, you know, same exact stuff that Richie just showed you. And it's just a back and forth between a dip nib, India ink, and a scratch tool for me.
And Richie, I watched your video, a video about you doing your work, and I was noticing you're using an old quill pen, an actual
it's
dip
one
pen as opposed to any kind of roller pen.
Yeah, honestly, I'd recommend it to anyone because I used to use, I fluctuate between them. I think it's just to keep it interesting for myself. I'll use Rotring, you know, technical pens, and then microns, and then pens, just to keep it interesting. And there's always the appeal of the using the one thing and then jump into the other. You start to appreciate the benefits of one against the other. But for years, I was using microns and Rotring technical pens. But the problem with them is the microns, it's very easy to crush the nibs. I'm like really heavy-handed, and with the little 0.5s, I'll just crush them and split them, and then you can't get a consistent line. And then with the Rotring pens, they get blocked very easily unless you maintain them. It's like keeping a pipe or something. Like you got to keep cleaning it every night, and it's just
have a sonic cleaner to
handle those things. You want it, you know, I'll end up finishing drawing at 2 a.m. I don't want to have to clean a pen, and I like the ritual of cleaning the pen is kind of nice, but if doing it all the time, and there's nothing more annoying than when you're set up, you've got your music playing, you're ready to draw, and you're ready for a good drawing session, and then you're shaking the pen and there's nothing coming out, you know. That sucks. But then I'd have a lot of people recommended to me, they'd say, oh, why don't you try using have you ever tried using a quill pen, and this, you know, you're into all worldy stuff, why have you ever used this thing? And I'd think, well, this is this primitive tool, which why would I want to mess around with that? It sounds real super messy, and I'd have to keep dipping it all the time. The reality of it, when I finally gave in and tried it, is that once you load it up with ink, you can draw for like 5 minutes or whatever easily. You're not actually constantly loading it. And the beauty of it is that which I hadn't realized until I used one, is that if you apply pressure, it thickens the line, because obviously the nib splits
the nib.
So instead of needing like 5 different gauges of pen, you just have one real simple, like all I've bought is just like the basic Speedball starter kit with the like 512 nib. It costs like £12 for the whole kit, and then that's all you need. And then you just buy your Speedball ink, which is weirdly, if you buy Speedball ink in like a little tub like that, it costs like $5 or something. But then if you buy a massive big bottle of it like that, it costs like $7. It's ridiculous. Like, I don't know how, if you buy a giant canister of it, it costs nothing. But, you know, a lifetime worth of ink. But using that dip pen, you can get every gauge line, you can get your fine lines, and then get like thick outlines. It never gets blocked. You just give it a wipe and kind of rinse it off. So
you said you had a heavy-handed style. Do you found did it force you to lighten your style because of that, using it as a pressure instrument?
I think if anything, it gives it a more organic quality than you would get with a technical pen, where you've got actually, I find I'm almost battling against the consistency of a technical pen, because it's almost too perfect. You want to get a bit of flair in there, whereas with the dip pen's a bit more unwieldy, and you actually you can't help but show a bit of movement in it. And, Sorry. David, did you say you use the dip pen exclusively?
Yeah, usually the 108, the Hunt 108. It's a brass, really flexible one. I think it's kind of a standard for a lot of comic book artists and stuff back in the day. But yeah, same.
Also, the other one I use is the deleter nibs. Have you tried those? Like a Japanese manga.
Oh yeah.
The reason I used them is because I found all of the nibs I was buying were for writing, basically. They were always being sold as like for calligraphy or writing. And I was like, there must be nibs out there for illustration. And there are, but they're Japanese made manga nibs. And there's one, Deleter make a few, and they're amazing. The Zebra nibs too. But Deleter and Zebra are both excellent. And because they're kind of a lot more rigid, so you can really be heavy-handed with them. And I think the difference is, if it's made for writing, it's made to only kind of go one way, whereas with illustration, it's made to kind of move around a bit more. So yeah, I'd recommend it to anyone. Give it a shot. It's not as intimidating as it might seem.
I prefer to use brush pens mostly these days because quite differently than what you guys are discussing. I use paper, although I feel like I need to start trying some different surfaces now after hearing you guys talk about it. I remember David kind of introducing me to the clay board.
Yeah.
I hadn't worked on something like that in many years, and I still don't have a lot of experience with it, but paper has just, you know, been my medium, and I always was used to making things big and shrinking them down because, you know, it tightens up. And I think that's how I learned to do it as a kid. My mother was a commercial artist, and she would draw things large and it would be, you know, reduced small and it would look so much tighter. So I was naturally working that way. But I've been, and I used to use the Roadburn, what they're called, you know,
Rapidograph pens.
Rapidograph. That's, couldn't think of the name of it. For years, I used those. I got really, because my style more, the way I draw is a lot faster. I move and make broad strokes and a lot of line variation. And I found that the rapidographs, you know, there's a great use for them when it comes to doing detail slowly. They've got a beautiful, obviously, you know, use for things like that. But I was getting more and more into doing kind of like broad brush strokes and things like that. And now I prefer to do it that way, where it's kind of, it's loose. It's very loose. I do a lot of line variation with brushes and brush pens.
Just watching your work, I always feel like it lends itself almost more than anyone else that I see towards watercolor and how you draw your images out, and what I watch you do on Instagram, anything else, it always has a very fluid feel to it.
Yeah.
That it seems like a very rigid, structured inking line would conflict with that. And it makes sense that you use brush pens.
Yeah, because watercolor is my medium of choice when it comes to color. I prefer to use liquid inks and watercolors, and I mix them, and I use acrylics and gouache on top of that. But yeah, I use waterproof India ink or a pen with waterproof ink, and I usually draw it out that way, let it dry, and then do the watercolor or the ink on top of that. But it's a very different feel and a different process than what Richey and David are describing.
Do you use the Pentel brush pen?
Yeah, I have I have a couple. I've got this Japanese Pentel brush pen, and I've got another one that's a little bit thicker, which is like this, which is pretty common.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. Becky, I think Becky and I talk a lot about these things because she does these with
I think Becky told me on the other one, the black one, because I think she'd seen Brandon Holt using it, and then I might be getting this wrong. It was one of those things just in that circle where one person's using the thing, and then Becky had latched on. I think Brandon Holt uses it for so much of his work, and then Becky had started using it, and then she was trying to kind of sell it to me, and she was like, no, but it's actually a brush. I was like, no, I've got brush pens at home. She's like, no, but the ones you're talking about have a foam nib. It's basically made to be like a tip, but it's made of foam. She's like, this is an actual brush.
It's a brush. It's got fibers.
I was kind of like, no, I get it. And then she was like, no, just try it. And I used it. I was like, oh, it's an actual brush. I get it.
Yeah, it's not different than dipping a brush. It's just, you know, has a plastic handle, and it's
but the ink's really solid and really intense.
Yeah, very dark, very rich. That's what
I use that for like even if I'm using a dip pen, that's my second in command for filling out black space,
wide areas.
It's great.
Yeah, that's really satisfying, I think, to use those things. But I also still use a nib as well, like you, because sometimes I draw that way if I want it to be really fine. I will still sometimes use the nib and dip it.
And I just want to say quickly that that's like a arm of Arik's work that I've always admired too. But since we're kind of talking about posters, it's not impossible, but you don't really do a watercolor piece and then screen print it. I don't know how much people know about the process, but like whenever Arik posts photos of these like full-on watercolors, it's amazing, but it has to be a record cover or something that's printed digitally. So
burlesque can do a pretty good job of
Yeah,
separating
it can be
those
done
things.
for sure.
But it's a lot more work. It's a different process.
Mhm.
And but I don't approach screen print posters that way normally because it's a lot more complicated. But
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something about that idea that I think is like, I know it can be done, and they've done it with printing, like a lot of the Paisley stuff they've done. It's amazing, and I've seen Mondo do it too, where they'll take a full colored watercolor or oil paint or something like that. But to me, a big part of that process, like we talked about earlier, of the final stage of the process being the actual screen printing, I like the idea of leaning into that and working with the construction of it is actually really interesting to say, okay, what can I achieve with 3 colors?
Totally.
And then what if I use the paper color as a color, you know? And all of those things are more interesting than saying, hey, let's do away with all those rules. We'll just make whatever we want, and then just you deal with this, you know, you make it into a screen print. It's like, it can be done, but I think there's something more interesting, as has always been the case with restrictions on things and trying to work with limited palettes and stuff like that.
I feel like Eric's style might be more akin to like seeing it in print would be more is that stone lithograph style that allows for fluid transfers of color palettes across the same piece where they flow together. Whereas screen printing, that is a tricky one. There's a couple out there that really defy everybody else, but like you were saying, Eric, I think the amount of work you put into it to get it out of a screen print is amazing when they do that.
I think also that there are things that it pushes you to do that you might have not thought about before. So there was a piece, Arik, that I remember we were at Roadburn a few years ago, and you had the piece where there's that gnarly looking, I don't know what he is, that guy leaping over the rocks with the 2 knives, kind of attacking you face on. But you showed me how you had a sort of semi-translucent layer which patched in all the shadows, and it's like that comes about through thinking about the screen print process of like, okay, how can I apply that? Because if you apply a 50% translucency of this one screen, depending on what it lands on, it's going to be a different color. It's going to be a shadowy version of that. And looking at that poster specifically, it really brought the whole thing to life, just having that that layer of shadow on everything, you know, which is very much intrinsically a screen print.
When I learned about that opened up so many doors for me, because that's one layer that you can get a lot of mileage out of.
Exactly.
You know, and David, I think David, you there?
Yeah, sorry guys, something just happened, but no, I'm back.
Yeah, the transparency layer thing. I think, David, you may have been the first one to tell me about that, because I didn't figure that out until about 5 years ago or something, about doing a transparency layer where, you know, it's a different color based on what it lands on.
Well, again, that's just their relationship with the printer. They have to trust, you know.
Yeah, because Mouse does that well too, and so does Burlesque. And I have worked with printers who cannot do that. And I've had some terrible results with it. There's one printer I worked with who I won't name. They completely ruined an entire huge poster like this that I didn't pay for. It was for somebody else, but they completely botched it, and because they didn't understand that process, and it ruined all of them.
Yeah, I had the same thing actually, where it was like a run of posters for different territories with like tour dates for a different version of the poster. But there were different screen printers in different territories, and it was clearly labeled like 50% trans, like nothing too complicated, but one of them had just been, you know, slammed on a kind of gray layer or something over it.
It comes out being like the color instead of it's almost like they didn't put enough transparency fluid in it, and then you've got like this kind of light blue layer on top of something, and it looks completely off.
Jeff Wood's 2004 string cheese hookah, check that one out. He did an unbelievable job of transparency level on the top of that, with transparent smoke coming off of the hookah, and you just shift the poster just a little bit and the smoke comes and goes. It's really a cool piece. He was always one of my favorites to see understanding a gloss coat and knowing how to use transparency layers. He just put a little sparkle in it, and then just, oh, it's just outstanding stuff. And how inks layer on top of each other and gloss each other up as they go. That's interesting to watch grow.
Yeah.
But yeah, transparency layers are tricky for sure from what I've seen.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at these questions again, and the last one is, Arik, how do you get the watercolor paintings into digital form? Do you scan or photograph it? It's a great question.
Yeah, I scan them. I have an oversized scanner, not oversized enough, but bigger than average. It's an Epson 10,000 XL.
I have the exact same one right down here on the floor.
Oh, you do? Yeah.
Did Jake recommend it to you?
What's that?
Did Jake recommend it to you?
No, I just discovered it from research out
I
there.
remember just going to print shops to have my stuff scanned for record covers, and because I didn't have a big scanner, and what would happen is I would think, hey, you're the experts, you're going to do a good job of this, but they wouldn't realize that you really got to weigh it down. You know, you got to get it, especially if it's a watercolor piece, you got to flatten that shit.
Yeah,
it's got to all be put in the glass, and I'd get it back on a disc or something, and it would all be like areas all blurred out and stuff. And I remember sending it to Jake at Deathwish and being like, I'm really sorry about this, but it's not quite right. I'm gonna have to get it done again. And he was like, yeah, don't trust any of those guys. Get yourself an XL 10,000, the same one that you have.
Yeah, it's great. It's not cheap.
I don't have to worry about it again. You know?
Yeah, they're not cheap, but they are professional, and it's about, I want to say 12 by 16 inches is the bed size.
Here's the trick though, the thing that he recommended to me that when I bought one was that if you bought one new, it's like $2,500 or something. But if you look online, there are people who do like recommissioned or basically they get old ones and they kind of refit all the parts of them and then sell them on. So I paid like £600 for it, which is still a lot of money, but it's not $2,500.
Yeah, and that's what I paid too. I got it.
I've been using it for like a decade now, and it's does the job.
Yeah. I got mine barely used for like half the price, about the same as what you paid for. Because if you're going to do scanning, you really have to invest in a good scanner, because there is a difference between, you know, mid-grade and good ones. And almost all of them are, legal size documents, 8.5 by 11, or sometimes 9 by 12. And I used to have one that small many years ago, and I used to have to piece it together and scan part, fit it together, and that was a nightmare. And then I would have to take big pieces to photo labs, which were the only places I'd have to go, some photo lab in Manhattan. I'd have to take it there, and they would scan it and charge me like $175 just to scan it. And which is, absurd.
I remember going into one of those photo lab type or whatever it is over here, some like Photoshop place, and having them scan it and watching this guy put the poster in or the illustration, and then knowing that I'd look at it and be like, you need to weigh that down. Like, you're not gonna, it needs to be flat. And he didn't have a clue what he's doing, because he's probably normally just does it with photographs or something. And I remember just kind of being like, out of my way. Like, I just grabbing books off the shelf and whatever was in the shop and just like piling random things onto it until it was like definitely flattened down and was going to give a clear scan of it. But it's a good investment for sure.
Yeah, there's also drum scanners that some of the really high-end places have, where you can scan things that are like, many feet wide in one go. But they're round. It's a round cylinder which curves the piece like this and scans it that way. So it has to be a flexible piece of work. Like, you couldn't do a painting or
your boards aren't going to fly.
Yeah. But some of the original album artwork I did, like the Dope Smoker, not the second one, the first one, was scanned on a drum scanner that way, where they just kind of fed it in and it rolled it and scanned it and got a good scan that way. But yeah.
Guys, we are running on 2 hours and 15 minutes. This has been an outstanding conversation, and I've really enjoyed it. But we are running long. I can't thank you enough for coming and joining us today and sharing what you do. I think how long we've been going is a testament to how these things roll. And it's nice to hear you guys talk about what you do and where you draw your inspirations and everything, what you use as tools, all that stuff. So I really want to thank you guys for coming out and joining us and all the giveaways and all that sort of stuff. All the people who came in and listened to us talking and joined the chat room, thanks so much for coming. We've really been enjoying these, and it's been great to have these guys here today. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Corey, thanks for having us.
Right on. It's been really great, and we'll see you out there. Your work, if nothing else. Everybody go out and get yourselves some posters from these gentlemen. They're the best of the best. Right on. Thanks, guys. Have a wonderful afternoon, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.